staff are in listen-only mode.
Click that again. There you go. Oops.
Welcome to the conversation with Paul Greenwood, hosted by FAST of America. Paul needs no introduction, and we're very excited to have him with us. And so I'm going to turn this conversation over to Paul. I'd like to remind everyone that you are muted. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions two ways. One is to ask a question in the chat box to the entire audience. Another way is to raise your hand and I will unmute you. And I'm very excited you're here. My name is Tori Lloyd, and we're going to turn this over to Paul Greenwood. Thank you, Paul, for joining us.
My pleasure, Tori, and thanks for facilitating this way of communicating. And to all of you who've tuned in, thank you so much. And welcome to my office at the San Diego District Attorney's Office. One of the hazards of living in beautiful Southern California is that sometimes you have to have skin cancer procedures, so that's what you're seeing on my nose there. I just had a procedure last week and I'm getting the stitches out in a couple of days. What I have to do is preface my remarks with the fact that what I'm going to share with you by way of introduction and in response to hopefully some of your questions are going to be my opinions. They're not necessarily those of my office in terms of them endorsing everything I say, but that's the freedom I have as a prosecutor, and I'm very grateful that in this office we don't teach our prosecutors to be robots with a script. We can be ourselves, be our own personalities, and sometimes we stray from the sort of typical response of some prosecutors' offices. So with that said, I just want to give you a little bit of a brief introduction of where I am coming from in the sense I am a deputy district attorney. I've been a lawyer for, gosh, 38 years now, and I've been with this office for 23 years. We pride ourselves on trying to make every deputy district attorney want to do nothing but this job. We have developed a reputation around the country of creating a career prosecutor's office, and I'm an example of that, 23 years in this one office. What is unusual for me, though, is that I've been prosecuting crimes committed against older adults, seniors, elders, whatever you want to call them, for the last 20 years. And that is very unusual for any prosecutor in any office, whether it's large or small, to devote so much time to this one area. But my reason is very simple. I have developed for myself a passion and an interest in this area, and something that I decided many years ago I was going to make it my career for as long as they would allow me to do it. So 20 years ago, I wasn't looking for this assignment. I was given it by the elected district attorney, who brought me into his office and told me that apparently Adult Protective Services had been onto him and had told him in no uncertain terms that our office was ignoring a escalating problem of crimes of elder abuse. And they had wanted him to assign a prosecutor to this growing area. So that's where I became involved. And it was an area that I knew nothing about. I didn't even know the code section for the law that governs elder abuse in California. And frankly, at the time, I thought I would do it for 2 years maximum, and then I would get back into the real hardcore criminal prosecution that I knew. How wrong I was, because I have developed this passion for this subject for many reasons. Number one, my own parents are role models for me. My mother's still alive, age 92, and I was realizing that predators were targeting my parents' generation. And that made me angry. It made me determined to do something for my parents' generation. Secondly, I was realizing that unfortunately this was an area that had been largely overlooked and ignored by my fellow prosecutors around the country. And I didn't like that, and I decided that I would do a part in trying to redress the balance. And after a while, I started hearing stories, many stories, from victims, from families, from other concerned individuals about cases that really should have been investigated and should have been prosecuted. And that's what made me determined to do whatever I could to open up some of these prior secret cases. So this is how I went about it, and there's no real textbook answer for this, but I was learning on the job. There was no manual that I went to help me with this. There was no protocol that I was able to refer to. The only thing I could do was turn to one or two people who became my mentors, and I have to give tremendous kudos to a lady boy by the name of Candice Heisler, who was then a deputy DA in San Francisco, from whom I got a lot of inspiration. And I started out on this journey 20 years ago, realizing, number one, that I needed to influence and contact my law enforcement colleagues. And so I spent a long time talking to law enforcement, and the question I kept asking was, why aren't I seeing these cases? Why aren't you bringing me these cases? Got some very interesting responses, one of which was, well, Greenwood, I tried that a few months ago. I investigated the case. I brought it to your office, and it sat on a prosecutor's desk for several months, and then it was rejected. That kind of response from a prosecutor to a detective can be very demoralizing. And so I was trying to then say to the police, look, if you find that kind of situation, bring it to me. We'll talk it over. Let's see what we can do to make this case a reality. But then there was this other response where police officers were telling me, Greenwood, you don't want to deal with these cases. And I was very perplexed. Why not, I would ask. And they would tell me, well, there's no point because these people are bad witnesses. They're going to be poor historians in the courtroom. They're forgetful. They're delusional. You know, they were giving me all these stereotypes as to what happens to you when you become elderly. And again, I tried to put an end to that, and I said, look, let's make any assumptions about elderly victims. You bring me the facts, and if the facts are there and if the evidence is there, then let me just roll with it and see where it goes. And so gradually, after a year or two, the cases started trickling in. The first year I prosecuted 17 cases, I think. The next year it doubled, then it tripled, and as it got more and more. We're up to probably this year, I don't know, 250, 300 felony cases throughout the county of San Diego. One of the things that I needed to do early on was talk to the police chief of San Diego Police Department. That was the biggest law enforcement agency in our county. And until I arrived on the scene, they didn't have any dedicated police unit investigating these crimes. We had a domestic violence unit, we had a child abuse unit, and then of course all the other police units, gangs, narcotics, but nothing for elder abuse victims. And I waited for the opportunity, but it came eventually when the police chief invited me to talk to him and his higher management people. And one thing my mother had always taught me was, if you get an opportunity, don't squander it. And so I addressed the chief in front of all his upper management folks, and I just said to him in a meeting, Chief, if you're serious about this, you need to create a unit. And he did. And that was about 16 years ago, and today it is still there. We have 5 detectives and a sergeant who are involved in investigating these crimes. And I'm just so thankful that we do have this unit in force. And of course the quality of investigations is remarkable. they know what I'm looking for, they know what I need, and so they get used to my style, and they also get encouraged because when they invest time in investigating, they then see the results in hopefully being converted into an issuable case. And then they get to sit next to me in the primary hearing, they get to see the witnesses, and ultimately, hopefully, a plea, or if not, it goes to trial, and hopefully then a conviction. So that's been quite a success story. But even with that unit of detectives, and on a wider scale with other members of law enforcement, here's the number one problem that I always face. Well, there's two. One problem is where detectives or first responder officers hear from the victim, and the victim says, I don't want to, quote, press charges. And even though we've been in existence for 20 years, still there are officers in San Diego who will take that and will decide that as a result, we shouldn't do anything. And I'm constantly telling officers and detectives, no, that is absolutely unacceptable. We must not allow victims to dictate whether or not a case gets filed. So please don't put that in your report. I don't want to see it. It's not relevant. Whether victims want me to press charges or not, it doesn't matter. And besides, if we give the decision to victims, then we are actually putting pressure on them, because defendants will then put pressure on them to say don't press charges. And they will be in fear, and they will fear retaliation. So that's one strong message I always send out to all the law enforcement agencies in my county. We must not allow victims to tell us which cases get investigated and which get filed. Secondly, and this is something which I have to be very careful about and say it in a very sensitive manner, but we must not allow police officers to tell me whether the financial allegation is a, quote, civil matter. Anyone who is a witness in a courtroom who says that is a civil matter is giving a legal opinion. And to give a legal opinion, you have to be qualified as an expert witness. And to be able to do that, you have to demonstrate that you've had probably years of legal practice. And with the greatest respect to my law enforcement colleagues, 99% of them are not lawyers, and they don't have legal expertise. They are not in the best position to tell me or the victim or the victim's family whether or not, quote, this is a civil matter. And so I'm always telling police agencies, do not say that, do not make that determination, just gather the facts, please, and bring me the evidence. And let me and my colleagues who are lawyers, who've been in this business maybe 20 years, 25 years, and like me, 38 years, let us make that determination as to whether or not this is, quote, just a civil matter or whether it's a crime. Unfortunately, too many cases never get to a prosecutor's desk around the country because this decision is being made every single day in America by police officers. My point is this. We shouldn't be placing police officers in this predicament. It's analogous to me standing up and lecturing other people about how to make an arrest, how to do a hot stop on a vehicle. I have no clue how to do that. I'm not trained to do that. I'm not qualified to do that. That is the exclusive area of police officers. Again, I'm in the best position to determine whether a case is civil or criminal, not a police officer. So that's the area that I've concentrated on for many years, and I still have to repeat that message every time almost. The other area that I've focused on, particularly with financial abuse, is realizing that I can only do my job if we are part of a multidisciplinary team approach. So we need to get financial institutions involved, we need to get adult protective services involved, we need to get clergy involved, next door neighbors involved, we need to involve civil accountants, hairdressers, first responder Meals on Wheels, mailmen, mailwomen, anyone who has contact with seniors and sees red flags that show maybe a change in behavior or some other indication of isolation, something that would maybe be a predictor that the person is indeed a victim of financial elder abuse. And for example, Thursday, we are holding a community meeting at a senior center. One of our commissioners or supervisors, as you call them in our county, one of our elected officials is joining me and the detective in a seminar for elders called Don't Get Hooked. And we are going to be spending 2 hours at the senior center talking about scams primarily, but also other forms of abuse. We're having Adult Protective Services there, the detectives are going to be there, myself and other people from my office, and it's going to be a useful exercise to get the word out to the community. So in conclusion, I would just say this. In order to successfully put a dent into this escalating crime of financial exploitation, it's got to be a team approach. I think that it's got to be led by your county prosecutors. It's got to be joined in with by police officers, by Adult Protective Services, by financial institutions. We've got to involve the senior community and together join forces, send out public service announcements, and make sure that we make this a priority. I never allow the excuse lack of resources to be used as the reason why we don't do these things. So whether you're in a rural county or a very busy populated urban county, it doesn't matter. I think we can still find resources to address and tackle this problem. Now I want to just deal with a couple of questions that have already been given to me by Tori, and then we'll hopefully open it up for more discussion. So the first question came from actually a prosecutor in Maryland, which is great, and the question was how to get the buy-in from the police departments. And this person has said we make strides when we can find an individual supervisor interested in the issues, but once that individual moves on, we have to go back to the beginning. And frequently the next supervisor is never interested in senior issues. We've tried conversations with higher police management. Seems that we need to now create some kind of public pressure, but we have to be careful not to create tension and create barriers between us and the police. That's a very valid question from a prosecutor, and that is one of the frustrations, is the fact that you get working with a detective and then they get promoted and they get moved on. So that's why I am absolutely a belief in talking to the chief and trying to have the chief understand that elder abuse is one of the fastest growing crimes in our nation's history, and that we are losing a lot of money from seniors to the crooks, and we need to try to address the issue by creating a point person or a team of detectives. And I think once the police chief understands that this is a big problem, and maybe to do that you have to bring in to this meeting somebody from Adult Protective Services who can also back you up on the number of calls that are coming into the local Adult Protective Services and how few of these calls ever get converted into real live investigations and then prosecutions. Try to use those stats to persuade your police chief to have resources. Now, if the police chief says, well, I'd like to, but I don't have the money available, that's when I think together you get a commitment from the police chief to go with you to the people who control the purse strings, whether it's the mayor's office or your county commissioners, whoever it is. You bring the problem to them in a public forum, and we did that many years ago, and we brought in a lot of senior victims to tell their story, and that is compelling. When people hear from victims who've not had justice, that is very compelling. Another question that I had, which I'll try to bring up now, was also a very interesting question from someone at the Federal Trade Commission. Thank you for this question. Do you see differences, cognitive, health, age, gender, or otherwise, between people who are financially exploited by non-family, such as scammers, and those who are exploited by friends, families, and trusted others? Well, not really, because if you are a victim of financial abuse, whether it be a scam or through a caregiver stealing or undue influence by a extended member of your family, it's really done to target various weak areas that the victim is demonstrating. Maybe because the victim is somebody in the early to mid stages of some form of dementia. One of the common denominators, though, is they are isolated. Whether they are isolated through the manipulation of the perpetrator or just simply through life circumstances. They've just lost a spouse or a life partner. They're living alone. The adult children are living nearby. The scammer finds these people, and they can use loneliness to target the victim, to persuade them that they are in fact the winner of the sweepstakes, or their grandson is in jail and they need to send money. Different types of scams obviously attract different types of victims. So for example, the sweetheart scam. Yeah, my typical victim there is a widow who's lonely and who decides that she's going to go onto the dating scene, and she actually is pretty savvy. She's in her late 60s, early 70s, and she uses a dating service online. I've had a number of those referrals in the last few months. But other than that, I don't see any distinction other than that primarily I would say 70% of my financial abuse victims, whether from a predator who's a scammer or from a family member, are widows. That's who I see. Okay, so now I think we go to the chat room, and
we have another question. Isolation is the #1 indicator of physical and financial abuse, but when families report that an elderly parent is isolated, law enforcement often responds to that. That's a civil matter. What can families do to encourage law enforcement to investigate isolation and find the abuse that is hidden? And you touched on that, Paul. Could you elaborate?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, just that response from law enforcement, to me, is inappropriate and needs to be corrected. So if, in fact, people get that response, you're more than happy to quote me as a prosecutor. Police should not ever be saying that, because that demands a legal conclusion that only legally qualified experts can give. So that is not an appropriate response from law enforcement. It's a question of getting the facts together and presenting those to a prosecutor. But of course, if the law enforcement doesn't have an understanding of some of the dynamics, then you may not even be able to get them to do an investigation. That's why it is important to be able to reach out to a network such as this, who may have connections in your area, who understand that isolation is the #1 indicator of abuse of an elder. That adult protective services need to be brought into this discussion, and hopefully they may in fact have done their own investigation and agree that isolation is going on and that this needs to be investigated by local law enforcement. If all else fails, I would recommend that you contact your local elected prosecutor's office, the county prosecutor's office. And I always tell people a phone call is no good. You have to write a letter. And letters get response. And I always tell people, please don't be negative, don't be critical. Just state the brief facts that you believe that this person is a victim of a certain type of abuse based upon 3 or 4 factors. That you've tried making a traditional police report, but it has failed. And that you're asking the elected prosecutor to assign their own investigator or a prosecutor to dig deeper and see if in fact a crime is occurring. If you do that, my experience tells me that when letters are written, they get on people's desks. And when you get a letter on your desk, you can't avoid it. I get letters that have been written to my boss a lot, and they filter their way down to me, and I get cracking on it, and you have to. There's another one here, Tori, is that what can communities do to encourage local law enforcement to intervene in elder abuse?
Yep. Yes, and I think you certainly touched on that. It was a follow-up question to the first one. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts.
Well, I do, in the sense that, of course, this is the perfect time of year to be discussing this. As we all know, or we should know, June 15th is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. And each year, this message is becoming louder and more prevalent. And I would imagine that your community somewhere knows this and is hopefully preparing an event. If they are preparing an event tied in with June 15th, then we need to make sure that the police chief is aware of this and that an invitation is sent out to the various law enforcement agencies in your area to attend that event and to follow up and to make sure that the chief sends somebody along. I've been very fortunate to be invited to several trainings around the country, and I can spot them a mile away. These are the officers that are there, not because they want to be there, but because they were told to be there by their chief. They always sit in the back row, they've got the sports page open in the newspaper, and it's my job within the first 5 minutes to grab their attention and to make them, at the end of the session, to say, I'm glad I came, I learned something, and I'm going to take this information back because this is outrageous, that crimes are occurring and we're missing them. And I think once you get these folks in a room and some of the stories are being told, law enforcement are great at understanding that we need to do a better job. And so that's my goal, is to excite and arouse the passions of law enforcement to do something in response.
We have,
okay, so then
Go ahead.
Carry on.
Elder,
okay, so we have this question: elder abuse by assisted living facilities and conservators is rampant, but those crimes are rarely investigated or prosecuted. What can communities do to encourage law enforcement to address abuse by facilities and conservators? Great question. And for 18 years, that was a frustration for me, because I was getting very, very few referrals from facilities, very few law enforcement investigations of crimes being committed in facilities. 2 years ago in San Diego, the local newspaper, the Union Tribune, did a series of 5 articles, starting on a Sunday, about the lack of law enforcement involvement in investigating crimes being committed in assisted living and skilled nursing facilities. Those articles got the attention of our commissioners or board of supervisors. As a result, the board of supervisors invited me and my boss to talk to them about what we could do to fix the problem. And of course, I cleared it with my boss, but I knew that one way was for the commissioners to find money to devote to our office. Well, when you have a problem that surfaces that the public are reading about, it's amazing sometimes how quickly money is found. Well, they devoted $1.3 million out of the general fund, probably from sales tax, to our office. We were able to then hire 3 additional investigators. And then I set about devoting some time to establishing good relationships. We had a great relationship with our Attorney General's office locally anyway, who traditionally were responsible for investigating these crimes. But then I turned my attention to the 2 state agencies that are responsible for administrative action against facilities. In California, we have two distinct state agencies. One is called Department of Social Services, or Community Care Licensing, that handle violations in assisted living. And then we have Department of Public Health, who handle violations in skilled nursing facilities. I've spent 2 years cultivating relationships and protocol and procedure, and I'm pleased to tell you that now, every day, I am receiving by email copies of complaints that have been received in those two agencies within the previous 24 hours. And as a result, I get to screen these complaints, and I get to decide with the Attorney General's office whether we need to send out an investigator to investigate further. So it's been a slow process, but we are now beginning to uncover crimes committed by employees, by caregivers, and sometimes by other residents. But here's another challenge, that we are still depending upon facilities to blow the whistle on crimes maybe being committed by one of their employees. Many facilities don't want to do that because it's going to create possibly a lawsuit or create a fine because they've hired somebody who's just done something bad against one of their residents. So we're still trying to sift through that and encourage more facilities to do the, quote, the right thing. And I wish we could have in place some kind of procedure whereby we don't actually ding the facility that does the right thing by reporting one of their own to the agency. I wish we could somehow avoid some of these fines and go after the root cause, which may be the individual employee. But there are other times when we need to heavily fine but also prosecute the facility because the ownership is corrupt and it infiltrates down to the lowest level of the employee. So the standards are shocking, and we need to possibly close down that facility. Bit by bit, I think every agency can do this by reaching out to the state agencies and getting a teamwork approach going. Okay, we need more questions, please, from the audience, and otherwise we're going to have me just filling in. I can, while we're waiting for more questions, to come through the chat window, and please use the chat window on your screen there. You'll see it there underneath all the other listings. There's the chat arrow, so just click on that and type away. Let me, while we're waiting for a couple more questions, say this. Every state is different in terms of the law that governs the crime of what I call elder abuse. But here's this frustration from my point of view. Most states don't use elder abuse for their crime. They use vulnerable adult as their definition. And I can only tell you, as a prosecutor, I hate that definition, vulnerable adult. I'm so thankful that in California we do not have to use that definition. I think it's in some ways almost insulting to have to prove in front of a jury that my victim is, quote, vulnerable. You know, my mother's 92, and I don't think she's vulnerable at all. But many people would say, well, because she's 92, she must be vulnerable. No, I disagree. I'm thankful that in California we only have to prove one thing in terms of the elder abuse elements for the victim, that my victim is over the age of 65. How long does it take me to prove that in a jury trial? Probably no more than a minute. My victim comes in, takes the oath, gets onto the witness stand, and one of my first questions, I say, good morning, sir. Good morning, ma'am. This is going to be the most insensitive question you're going to be asked all day long. How old are you? And they give the answer. I'm 74. Okay. Now I can move on. I can move on to the facts. But if you are in a state where the prosecutor has to prove vulnerability, do you know how long that could take? That could take more than an hour or 2 hours in order to lay the foundation. So there are times when I hear from other states, well, we have only done 4 prosecutions in the whole of the state for this last year. And I said, well, look at your statute. Maybe the prosecutor is handicapped because the vulnerability is too big a hurdle to overcome. So I wish we could be more consistent throughout the United States and have a definition of what elder means. 65 is California. Some states it's 60. Other states maybe a different age. I don't know. But I wish we could have that. And then the other thing, which I always tell people, and this is a classic demonstration of today, the reason we don't get more cases being investigated is because we have lost the ability to ask questions. And people love to tell you their story, but that's not good enough. We have to learn how to interrupt the person and ask relevant, probative questions. Because you see, 95% of what victims want to tell me is irrelevant to my case. I've got certain criteria, elements of a crime that I have to prove. Okay, my victim's over 65. I have to prove that the defendant knew or should have reasonably known that his victim was over 65. And then I look at the layers of elements of the theft or the neglect or the physical abuse. Have I covered those? And in order to do that, I've got to ask the questions. The investigator's got to ask the questions. And I keep telling investigators, did you ask this question? Have you asked this? Have you talked to that person? And just when you think you're getting nowhere, ask another question, which can take you into a whole new area. So in trial, I love to ask questions to which I have no clue what the answer is. It's fun. It's interesting. It makes life risky, but it's good. And it's amazing what the victim or the witness will tell you. And everyone is surprised by their answers. And you know exactly why they've never told this to anybody before. Because when the judge tells me and the defense attorney to go talk to the witness, and we ask them, why is it that today is the first time you've ever said this? The answer is always the same. Well, Mr. Greenwood, nobody has ever asked me that question before. I'm convinced that in the majority of elder abuse investigations, the reason why these investigations never get converted to criminal prosecutions is because somebody has not been asking the right questions. Now, I've got another question here, or a comment. We need a national awareness campaign about elder abuse, similar to New York City's recent campaign. How can we collectively reach mainstream media to cover the epidemic of elder abuse? And as you say, the fastest growing crime of elder financial abuse. Well, it's happening. And I think through, in fact, resources such as Aegis Alliance, which is a great resource, and the National Center for Elder Abuse. These are two great resources. And if you just Google, it's amazing now, in 2016, what you can find through the internet in terms of places we can go to get the message out. We've got to encourage people to use social media more. I'm not a great fan of most of social media, but I do think Twitter is an excellent resource for people like me as to know what's going on. And you just got to type into Twitter a search engine for elder abuse, and it's amazing what you can come up with. So I think you're going to see this year, particularly with the June 15th World Elder Awareness campaigns, that there's much more of a consolidation of movements going on here. This webinar is an example too of getting the message out nationally. Okay, so we may have 44 attendees right now, but as this grows and as we share this resource with other people, maybe this time next year we'll have 444 people on a webinar, and so it will. But it's gradually taking shape. I can tell you, 20 years ago, it was very few people. And as I say, it was people like Candace Heisler, who I went to. There was very few people. But now, there's a lot of people around the country that you can turn to for help and encouragement. Okay, so there's another one here. Often prosecutors are only interested in pursuing financial exploitation cases, usually involving high dollar amounts. How can we encourage prosecutors to pursue other types of abuse or neglect? Great question. Let me start, first of all, with the dollar amount. And I've said this in public before. For a prosecutor's office to reject an elder financial abuse case because it doesn't meet the threshold of the office for the loss is, in my view, prosecutorial arrogance. To me, the value that has been stolen is immaterial. other than whether it's a felony or a misdemeanor. In California, if you steal over $950 from an elder, that's a felony. If you steal under $950, that's a misdemeanor. But having said that, whether the loss amount is $1,000 or $1 million, to me makes no difference in terms of whether or not I prosecute the case. And if there are prosecutors out there that will not prosecute because the amount is less than $20,000, I would love to debate that with them, because I do think that is arrogance at its worst. You see, what we are here to do is to prosecute the acts of people. And if somebody is stealing from an elder, regardless of the amount, that is a crime. And we shouldn't be using discretion to choose and pick which ones we take. We should be taking every single one that we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, the amount of the loss may in fact have an impact on the type of sentence, and I can understand that, but it shouldn't make any impact on my filing decision, the amount of the loss. Now, you say most prosecutors are interested only in pursuing financial exploitation cases rather than how do we get them involved in other forms of the abuse. My experience, though, has been that most prosecutors are comfortable in prosecuting physical abuse cases because they have photographs of bruises, of broken bones, and those cases tend to be a lot easier and quicker to prosecute. My experience has been that when you go to a paper case, a financial exploitation case, that a lot of prosecutors are hesitant to get involved in that, and they kind of steer away from it, and they may reject it as being, quote, civil in nature. So I try to encourage more prosecutors to actually do the opposite, is to do the financial. But there is one area that I have to be very careful about. That's elder neglect. My experience has been that jurors do not get very excited about elder neglect cases until and unless the photos are so shocking that they will sit up and almost hide their eyes in the jury box. So you've got to have very bad tuberous ulcers, stage 4. You've got to have maggots sometimes crawling out of these sores. You've got to have a skeleton almost, because typically the average, I call it the average, willful neglect, you get a lot of sympathy for the defendant because there may be other siblings who have abandoned their responsibility to take care of the elder. They've left it all to this one person, and the defense is, well, at least he tried. At least he was doing something. He got overwhelmed. So those cases I have to look at very, very carefully. This is where you need the expertise of a medical expert, someone like Dr. Mosqueda, someone else from the National Center or a forensic center, or who's a geriatric physician in a local hospital who can tell you by looking at photographs, this is willful neglect. You need the backing of a good medical expert who can do that to get the conviction in a neglect case. Okay, another question here. What are some of the most important contributions a FAST team can make to the multidisciplinary investigative process? Great question. And I think one of the most important areas is by having other experts in the field sit in the room with law enforcement and to be able to convince law enforcement that these cases are going to be provable and that they are worth the time to investigate and that they are there to assist law enforcement. For example, to get a forensic accountant involved early on who can do some of the screening and direct law enforcement on how to get the bank records and what bank records to look at. And I think it also, another positive of a FAST team is to allow someone like me to share with the team what I'm looking for. One of the things I constantly tell investigators is this: it is a felony to steal over $950 from an elder. I said, once you get to that threshold of a felony, Don't worry about following every single dollar so that you spend 3, 4, 5 months chasing every single lead. If you have evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to prove a theft over $950, bring it to me as soon as you can. Because once I prove the crime, then the defendant probably has no alternative but to plead guilty at an early stage. And then it becomes a matter of restitution. How much did this defendant steal from the victim? When you get to the post-conviction stage and you get into the restitution hearing, the rules of evidence typically are a little more relaxed, and you can get in information that you wouldn't be able to get into a guilt phase part of the proceedings. So that's something that a FAST team can share with one another, can generate, and there's a camaraderie that you can develop. But here's an important component of the FAST team. You've got to provide free food. If you can provide free food, law enforcement will be there, and they'll be there 10 minutes early. Okay, so you got to do it in a good setting, at conducive, free parking, free food at a time, and keep it on track. I've found that you need a chairperson who can really keep that meeting going so that it doesn't become unruly, it doesn't drag on, that people don't dominate the conversation, that people feel that they can all participate and no fingers are pointed at one another. You didn't do this, why didn't you do this? That it's done appropriately and professionally, and then you're going to build up a real good camaraderie. Okay, another question. Do you have suggestions for motivating elder abuse task force to be proactive? Well, yes, I do, and I just base this upon my own experience, which is that I have to split my time between the courtroom, this office where I'm reading and evaluating cases that have come in from my police departments. I mean, I can just tell you, maybe you can see that. Look, there they are. There's all my cases and a few others as well that I'm spending time here. But that's just 2/3 of my time. 1/3 of my time, I think, should be spent out in the community as a prosecutor. And I know this is pretty alien to most prosecutors. Most prosecutors don't think that their job is to be proactive in the community, but it is. In elder abuse areas, you've got to get out there. So I spend time in mobile home parks, talking to senior citizens, day centers, Alzheimer's clinics, go talk to folks in hospitals, in assisted living facilities, go listen, go talk to APS, go talk to the Ombudsman's office, and find ways that together we can be more proactive. Get onto public service announcements, do interviews on local television. My colleague, Scott Perello, just did a TV broadcast, which was broadcast on Sunday morning for half an hour with one of our local commissioners on elder abuse scams. Get those kind of things. Get the media involved. And of course the media, they want to talk not only to you, but they want to talk to one of your victims, family members. Try to get a case which has already been adjudicated where a family member wants to talk on camera. Get that story heard and distributed. Get on the national listserv and look for ideas. Talk to the National Center on Elder Abuse on kits that you can use, posters you can use. There's so many created things already out there that we can use to become more proactive. One of the things I have, actually it's on my other door, we have posters called Silence Isn't Golden. We use color coding, we use the golden, we use red for physical abuse, we use green for financial abuse, and we use blue for neglect. We get those posters out there. That's one way of becoming more proactive. And if you think, well, this is all going to cost money, yeah, it does. But have you ever thought about contacting an advertising agency and saying, hey, how about doing a pro bono project a year? And you will find that there are some advertising agencies who want to do that to help. Okay, What is the relationship in San Diego between prosecutors' offices and consumer protection? Thinking of home improvement cases. Some are scammers, but some are simply bad business people. Great question. Thank you very much. So in my 20 years, I've prosecuted many home improvement fraud cases. So number one, we have actually a consumer protection unit in economic crime. So there's overlap with them. So I'm exchanging information with them and they with me. So when they get in a complaint where the victim is over 65, they typically refer it to me because it will involve some form of elder abuse. I also have a great relationship with our Better Business Bureau. To me, Better Business Bureau is one of the most underused resources of law enforcement. They have a database, and I've learned that seniors may not make a police report, but they will complain to Better Business Bureau. And if I get in an inquiry about a suspect contractor, the first people I will talk to is Better Business Bureau. Hey, do you have anything on this guy? What can you tell me about him? Do you have any other complaints? Then I have also developed a wonderful working relationship with the State Contractors Licensing Board. It's called CSLB, Contractor State Licensing Board. And actually for a year and a half, they were kind enough to actually devote full time to my office an investigator from CSLB who spent all his time working in our office. That was brilliant. And so right now I have 3 cases from CSLB that I'm prosecuting right now that they investigated and they brought directly to me. But again, in order to do that, the prosecutor and law enforcement needs to reach out to your state contractor agency to learn which cases are being investigated. There are a lot of sting operations out there that you can then convert into prosecutions. And there are also licensed corporations and contractors, but they are overcharging and gouging elderly customers. And I think it's a narrow, fine line, but sometimes overcharging can be converted to a theft prosecution. And I'm right now evaluating such a case where I believe that the licensed contractor targeted seniors and clearly overcharged them for services that they didn't need anyway. So that, to me, could well spell the foundation for an excellent financial elder abuse case. But again, I depend upon the Contractors Board, Better Business Bureau to help me figure it out. Okay, another question. During my 9 years with APS, I've lost count of the number of times law enforcement refused to look at financial abuse cases, even often for large sums by family members, particularly when the victim suffers from dementia. How can we better enlighten law enforcement that cases concerning family members who drain their loved ones completely need to be considered as potential exploitation? Well, that's such a good point. So the question is, how can we enlighten law enforcement? Well, I think you can refer them to maybe prosecutors around the country who do prosecute family members for stealing. Again, we often say this: accelerated inheritance is not a good defense. And many of the cases involve a loved one stealing from a family member who does have a form of dementia or Alzheimer's. Basically, the elements are the same. You know, can I prove that this individual, whether they're a family member or not, took property belonging to this other person with the intent to permanently deprive? And particularly where you have a victim who has a diagnosed dementia, and your position is, as a prosecutor, I'm going to be able to prove that this person had such an advanced condition that they lacked the ability to give consent, and then I can prove that the defendant knew that and transferred the assets. That's a very strong case, regardless of the fact that they're a son or a grandson or a niece or a daughter. It doesn't matter. They're still a thief. And I think if you get this kind of rejection from law enforcement, I think it's based upon, unfortunately, ignorance of the law, of the fact that they are making decisions that they shouldn't be making, and you need to get the attention of the police chief through a letter saying this is not appropriate. And maybe a lunchtime sit down, clear the air with the police chief and his or her representatives, and bring in a couple of demonstrations of the case, and then say, well, I understand that there are other cases out there that have been prosecuted. For example, Elizabeth Lowy, fantastic, now retired prosecutor, but she did the nation's most premier case. Who was the perpetrator in that millions of dollars case? It was the son, Philip Marshall, who stole from his elderly mother, Lady Esther. So I think you can use that, but you can also use other cases that are far less amounts of money from other prosecutors who've prosecuted sons, daughters. These are cases that need to be prosecuted. Time for one more question, if there is one out there. How do we deal with advocates for elders, a non-medical advocate stating they are client-driven services? Representatives are acting on the client's statements, not recognizing their capacities, which may be in question. Consequently, concerned parties have nowhere to go. I'm not quite sure what we're talking about here, but it sounds like almost like a business who are providing, quote, client-driven services, who are not recognizing that their own clients may be suffering from some kind of cognitive impairment. And you're saying that concerned parties, that's outside people, have nowhere to go. Well, there is always somewhere to go. So your local adult protective services hopefully should be able to make an unannounced visit to the person that you're concerned about. Some APS workers are willing and able to do a very rudimentary, mini-mental examination of the person just to get a sense of whether there is cognitive challenges. And if so, then they need to be able to talk to the agency that's providing services, maybe even question how are these services drawn up. For example, I've had discussions with attorneys who've signed retainer agreements with a client whose capacity I've been concerned about. How on earth does your client understand what they're signing here? And so I think there are places for you to go to. Remember, if all else fails, contact the National Center on Elder Abuse, because they do have people there who can help you with these kind of questions, and they may be able to hook you up with people in that area who can provide the answer you're looking for. So it looks like we're coming up to the end of the hour, and I'm going to hand over to Tori in a moment. But I just want to encourage you all, and obviously we're all aware that this is going to be a huge problem in the future, but there are people out there who've got the vision, who've got the passion, who've got the purpose, and who've got the perseverance. And we need to be part of that movement. And if you start with National Center on Elder Abuse, ask for resources, link them in, get together, multidisciplinary approach, and it's amazing what you can do together. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining in this, and I hope it's been useful for you. Back to you, Tori.
And thank you very much, Paul, and for those of you who are able to join us this afternoon. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.